Need and formulation of hypothesis. A research hypothesis is a statement of expectation or prediction that will be tested by research. Before formulating your research hypothesis, read about the topic of interest to you. The research question flows from the topic that you are considering. The research question, when stated as one sentence, is your research hypothesis. In some disciplines, the hypothesis is called a thesis statement. Other words for hypothesized are posited, theorized, or proposed. Remember, your hypothesis must require two or more disciplines, one of which is law. This is essential since your paper is interdisciplinary and a demonstration of interdisciplinary process. In your hypothesis, you are predicting the relationship between variables. Through the disciplinary insights gained in the research process throughout the year, you prove your hypothesis. This is a process of discovery to create greater understandings or conclusions. It is not a strict proof as in logic or mathematics. What is the importance of hypothesis in research process? The research process begins and ends with the hypothesis. It is core to the entire procedure and therefore is of the utmost importance. A hypothesis can be formulated in several ways, yet it always performs the basic function of predicting the final outcome of the investigation. The hypothesis usually occurs after inductive reasoning, in which the researcher performs a series of observations in order to form a theory. This hypothesis is then part of the first stage of the research process, of which there are 10 phases. Turn your ideas into a research question. Review the literature. Design the study and develop your methods. Writing your research proposal. Issues about funding. Obtain ethical and trust approval. Collect and collate the data. Analyze the data and interpret findings. Implications of your research for clinical practice. Report on the study and disseminate the findings. A hypothesis ensures the entire research process remains scientific and reliable, following the principles of deduction. The hypothetico-deductive model was first proposed by Karl Popper, who suggested that theories about the world should come first and these should be used to generate hypotheses which can be falsified by the empirical data produced by observations and experiments. A type 1 error occurs when p-value is too large and the null hypothesis is falsely rejected and the research hypothesis is falsely accepted. A type 2 error occurs when the researcher falsely accepts the null hypothesis and falsely rejects the research hypothesis as p-value is too small. To confirm a null hypothesis is only used with statistics and claims there is no variation or difference between variables. Hypothesis formulation, few hints. Be sure to read on the topic to familiarize yourself with it before making a final decision. You need to make certain that the topic is researchable in an interdisciplinary sense, meaning that there is sufficient published material on the topic in the legal literature and in the literature of a second or possibly a third discipline to write a paper. As noted, a research hypothesis is more than just a topic. It has two elements or variables that are in relation to each other. Remember that within the word hypothesis is the word thesis. Your hypothesis is what you propose to prove by your research. As a result of your research, you will arrive at a conclusion, a theory or understanding that will be useful or applicable beyond the research itself. Avoid judgmental words in your hypothesis. Value judgments are subjective and are not appropriate for a hypothesis. You should strive to be objective. Therefore, the use of personal opinion is to be avoided. Your hypothesis must involve an issue or question that cannot be answered exclusively by the discipline of law. You should try to limit your inquiry to the literatures of 2 or 3 disciplines. It is best to choose a hypothesis where you already have some level of familiarity with the disciplines that are most relevant to the topic. Be sure that each term in your hypothesis is clearly understood and defined. Do not deal in generalities or assume that the reader knows the meaning of a technical term. Specify, if appropriate, whether you will be dealing with state or federal law or both on a comparative basis if appropriate. Know that your hypothesis may change over time as your research progresses. You must obtain the professor's approval of your hypothesis as well as any modifications to your hypothesis before proceeding with any work on the topic. You will be expressing your hypothesis in 3 ways: as a one-sentence hypothesis, as a research question, as a title for your paper. Your hypothesis will become part of your research proposal. How to write a hypothesis? Understand the purpose. A hypothesis is essentially the linguistic expression of a testable theory. It is expressed verbally or in writing and states a theory regarding an if blank then blank situation. The purpose of a hypothesis is to help create testable parameters through which information can be gained. Stated simply, it creates a specific informational goal to be explored. A chemistry hypothesis: if I mix sodium carbonate with an acidic substance, a reaction will occur. A biology hypothesis: if a rabbit is raised with dogs, it will exhibit dog-like behavior. A historical hypothesis: if economic socialism is enacted on a national scale, then significant effects will be observed in both the local and national economics. An anthropological hypothesis: if a new and better materials are introduced to a culture, then that culture will attempt to increase its ability to acquire those materials. Understand the scope. A hypothesis can be applied to and tested for subjects ranging from history to English. Determine your discipline. Will this be a scientific hypothesis or one for the humanities? You will need to decide this before formulating your hypothesis or doing any research. Usually, you will be forming a hypothesis as part of your assignment for a class, so the discipline will usually be decided by the subject matter of that class. Understand your assignment. Before you begin any research, you should understand what the goals and requirements of the assignment are. This will help limit the scope of your research. Discussion with your teacher. You may want to discuss your ideas with your teacher. Think about what you understand of the scope of the assignment and then ask your teacher for clarification. Your teacher will be able to tell you if you understand the assignment correctly. This can help keep you from wasting time pursuing an incorrect interpretation of what you have been asked to do. This will also give you the opportunity to get advice from your teacher on directions you could go on or where you find more information. Research your topic. Decide a topic based on limits of your assignment and then begin research. Read about the subject broadly or read up any material that was specifically assigned or required by the assignment. This will give you ideas for your hypothesis. You can find information from your textbooks at a library or online. You can also ask for help from teachers, librarians, and your peers. Be sure that your resources of information are accurate, as incorrect information can affect your results and often lead to lower grade. Analyze your information. Look at the information you have been given. Determine concentrations of information or areas where there may be holes. These can provide excellent ideas for information you can investigate. You can often find holes by looking for statements like "it is unknown" or places where information is clearly missing. Holes provide an excellent way for you to set yourself apart by finding, testing, and filling in information that may be missing. Concentrations of information will help you decide what information is readily available to be used to prove a hypothesis. Experimenting based on well-researched data will provide the easiest route, as you will have to get less information for yourself. Consider your questions. For example, you may be assigned a biological project on the life cycle of birds. An example question would be, what happens if I dye an egg blue? Will the bird hatch with a different color? This question can then be formed with a testable hypothesis. Write it down. The basic formulation for a hypothesis is, if I do this, then this will happen. The structure of the sentence can obviously get quite complicated depending on the complexity of the theory itself, but it can also be very straightforward and simple. Be careful. You will need to ensure that the hypothesis you have come up with is testable. You need to be sure that you can do the thing you are proposing. You will also need to determine that the results is something observable. It is also important to be able to control most of the variables which will determine the results. If these things are accounted for, you are ready to go. Test your hypothesis. You will need to formulate an experiment or research project which tests the theory you have proposed. Your experiment or research will be based on your hypothesis, so be sure that it actually tests and is appropriate for the proposed theory, rather than something else. Variables are often an important part of testing a hypothesis. Be sure that you understand and account for the variables in your experiment. Having control over as many of the variables as possible will give you better results and more accurate information. The hypothesis will often be a part of a larger assignment, usually a larger presentation or a paper. In doing your experiment or research, be sure to write down everything that you do and record any information or results. This will make it easier to complete the rest of the project. Form a thesis statement. While a hypothesis may not be directly usable for the humanities, it can be a vital part of forming a thesis statement. The thesis statement forms the backbone of most research in the humanities. Use a hypothesis to investigate information and use the results of your research to form your thesis. What are the essential characteristics of hypothesis? Hypothesis is an attempt at an explanation of certain puzzled facts. It is the attempt to find out the possibility of the occurrence of such a fact. Sometimes it is framed to explain certain scientific truth or to explain a law. It is probable explanation or presupposition of a cause. If the cause of an event is not known, the investigation starts with the probable cause. For example, if you perceive the effect of an accident and the cause is not witnessed, then the possible reasons for the accident are thought for investigation. No hypothesis is certain or definite at the stage of assumption. It is merely probable. It may be framed without evidence or evidence avowed insufficient. So it requires verification for confirmation. Through hypothesis, facts are organized in a systematic manner. The aim of hypothesis is to reach at the real explanation and to remove the puzzlement concerning the event. It is possible through systematization of involved facts. In this way, very often hypothesis is framed to explain a law. Formation of hypothesis is keenly connected with the verification of it. Hypothesis found in the form of a conclusion. Testing hypothesis versus tested hypothesis. Any hypothesis can be testing a concept or it can be developed as a result of a study. A testing hypothesis is one that can be tested, meaning you can measure both what is being done and the outcome. A tested hypothesis is tested with research, such as in a research study in social science. Testing hypothesis. If the water faucet is opened, then the amount of water flowing will increase. If fenders are placed on a bicycle, then the user will stay dry when going through puddles. If a prisoner learns a work skill while in jail, then he is less likely to commit a crime when he is released. If I raise the temperature of a cup of water, then the amount of sugar that can be dissolved in it will be increased. If the size of the molecules is related to the rate of diffusion as they pass through a membrane, then smaller molecules will flow through at a higher rate. If there is a relation between wavelength of light and a photosynthesis rate, then light of different colors will cause the plant to make different amounts of oxygen. If temperature is related to the rate of metabolism in animals, then raising the ambient temperature will cause an increase in animal metabolism. Tested hypothesis. Most students get sick during the final week of testing than at other times. One solar panel can replace one C battery. There is a positive correlation between the availability of hours for work and the productivity of employees. Worker satisfaction increases worker productivity. Amount of sun exposure will increase the growth of a tomato plant. Childhood obesity is tied to the amount of sugary drinks ingested daily. A dog can be trained to alert a human if the telephone is ringing. A good hypothesis is not only testable, that is, something you can actually test for in your study, but must also be falsifiable. It is tempting to ignore this requirement, especially as a new researcher. We want so badly to find great things and for our study to turn out exactly as we expect it to, that we tend to ignore the possibility that we don't know everything and that no prediction is fail-safe when it comes to humans. Try to keep in mind that all research is relevant. Whether or not your findings are what you expect, you will find something. Believe it or not, failing to find group differences can be just as important as finding expected group differences. In fact, studies that return results in opposition to what we were hoping for or believed would logically occur often lead to many more great studies that we could have hoped for. After all, it could be great for the findings of your current research to act as a guiding principle to your future research. It is likely that this would require less work in terms of literature review, as you would always be familiar with at least a portion of the literature that is relevant to your latest study.